Oberman has Russell Tice, former NSA analyst on his program. He's going to break some major news here. But first, he does a little bit of a setup so you know what this story is about. Let's watch the setup first.
It has taken less than 24 hours after the Bush presidency ended for a former analyst of the National Security Agency to come forward to reveal new allegations about how this nation was spied on by its own government, exclusively here on Countdown. Our third story tonight, Russell Tice has already stood up for truth before this evening as one source for the revelation in 2005 by the New York Times that President Bush was eavesdropping on American citizens without warrants. Tonight, the next chapter for Mr. Tice, a chapter he feared to reveal while George Bush occupied the Oval Office, that under the color of fighting terrorism, the Bush administration was also targeting specific groups of Americans for surveillance, non-terrorist Americans, if you will. Mr. Tice prepared to name one of those groups tonight. The NSA was already estimated to have collected millions of transmissions, emails, and phone calls of average Americans simply by patching communications companies. You will recall the infamous room 641A at the AT&T Folsom Street facility in San Francisco, in which the whole of AT&T's portion of the Internet was duplicated inside a room accessible only to the NSA. Mr. Tice, however, was also involved in another program and told us that he was first directed to focus on these specific groups in order to weed them out from legitimate surveillance targets, but ultimately concluded that the weeding out was actually an internal NSA cover story for a real goal, which was simply spying on those Americans. Initially, Mr. Bush told the nation all his surveillance was legal.
Anytime you hear the United States government talking about wiretap, a wiretap requires a court order.
After the New York Times revealed that to be a lie, Mr. Bush claimed his surveillance circumvented the constitutionally required process of obtaining a court-ordered warrant only in cases of clear links to terrorism.
In the weeks following the terrorist attacks on our nation, I authorized the National Security Agency, consistent with U.S. law and the Constitution, to intercept the international communications of people with known links to Al-Qaeda and related terrorist organizations. Before we intercept these communications, the government must have information that establishes a clear link to these terrorist networks.
Yeah, you know, that second lie is going to be very relevant here in the oncoming discussion. But the first lie, I always thought the press gave him such an enormous pass on. Bill Clinton lied about having oral sex in the Oval Office, and they went ballistic. They impeached the guy. And to this day, there is not a single article written about Bill Clinton that doesn't say, but his legacy was stained by the impeachment and what he did with Monica Lewinsky. He lied about it. Oh, my God. And I remember Chris Matthews going, he lied to me. Oh, big deal. All right, okay. So he lied about oral sex. But here is President Bush 100% clearly lying about who we spied on, saying that it always get a court order when they did not get court orders. And boom, he just got a pass. In fact, Newsweek just wrote a story about how, oh, John Conyers is going after President Bush because of political vengeance. No, in fact, they're all convinced that they would be better off politically if they didn't go after Bush. But as a matter of law, the man broke the law and lied about it so obviously, so clearly. If you don't do something about it, then your law means nothing. That's the real problem. Now, if you thought that was bad, wait till you get a load of what Russell Tice has for you next. First, who did the NSA spy on? Was it limited or to terrorists, like Bush said in that second clip, or anyone associated with terrorists, or was it broader? Wait till you get a load of how broad it was.
Joining me now in his first public revelation of these charges is Russell Tice, former analyst with the National Security Agency. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the overview. We heard the remarks of Mr. Bush in 2005 that only Americans who would have been eavesdropped on without a warrant were those who were talking to terrorists overseas. Based on what you know, what you've seen firsthand, and what you have encountered in your experience, how much of that statement was true?
Well, I don't know what our former president knew or didn't know. I'm sort of down in the weeds. But the National Security Agency had access to all Americans' communications, faxes, phone calls, and their computer communications. And it didn't matter whether you were in Kansas, in the middle of the country, and you never made a communication or a foreign communications at all. They monitored all communications.
How do you like that for broad? No, we're only targeting Al-Qaeda people. flat out 100% lie. No, they targeted all of us. Now, as Russell Tice explained later in the interview, did they have time to read every single email you sent or listen to every conversation you had? No, of course not. No one has that kind of time. But did they target it? Did they record it and collect it? Yes. Everything has been collected. And then they would go in and try to find things in there based on, things that he can't share with us, some different categories that they had, including, he explained, if your conversation is short, because apparently terrorists keep their conversations to 1 to 2 minutes. Interesting thing that out of the terrorist manual I did not know. So they were more likely to listen to a conversation of yours if it was for 1 to 2 minutes, as an example, right? As a low-level example of how they weeded things out. But do they have all your information, and could they access them at any time? Absolutely. And that is definitely not supposed to be the case. It is definitely illegal. They're supposed to get a court order before they listen on any of us because we're innocent. We didn't do anything wrong. They need a court order to say that we think they might have done something wrong before they listen in on your conversations or read your emails. So they've collected everything. Now, if you thought that was bad, wait till you see who they went after. So this is the big revelation from Russell Tice. Who was targeted here specifically? Let's watch.
I mentioned that you say that specific groups were targeted. What group or groups can you tell us about?
Well, there's sort of two avenues to look at this. What I just mentioned was sort of the low-tech, dragnet look at this. The things that I specifically were involved with were more on the high-tech side. And try to envision, the dragnets are out there collecting all the fish and then ferreting out what they may. And in my technical angle was to try to harpoon fish from an airplane kind of thing. Okay. So it's two separate worlds. But in the world that I was in, as to not harpoon the wrong people, in one of the operations that I was in, we looked at organizations just supposedly so that we would not target them, so that we knew where they were as not to have a problem with them. Mm-hmm. Now, what I was finding out, though, is that the collection on those organizations was 24/7, and 365 days a year, and it made no sense. And I started to investigate that. That's about the time when they came after me to fire me. But an organization that was collected on were U.S. News organizations and reporters and journalists.
To what purpose? I mean, is there a file somewhere full of every email sent by all the reporters at the New York Times? Is there a recording somewhere of every conversation I had with my little nephew in upstate New York? Is it like that?
If it was involved in this specific avenue of collection, it would be everything, yes. It would be everything.
It would be everything. They collected everything that U.S. news reporters, journalists sent, whether it was on their computer or conversations they had, including their sources. So you think that they didn't go in there and find out who the New York Times or the Washington Post sources were on stories that they wanted to know their sources, then later use that to target whistleblowers like Russell Tice? We don't know. And Russell Tice is very fair. He was inside the National Security Agency. He worked specifically on this stuff. But he does not comment on things he did not know or did not work on. He says, look, did the president authorize it? I have no idea. I wasn't involved in that decision-making process. What did they use this information for? I don't know, because that was for higher-ups. But what I do know is they collected specifically information on all reporters, media, and journalists, and they kept that information to be able to use at any time. What happened to targeting Al-Qaeda? I thought we were going only after terrorists. Of course, this is exactly what happens when you give somebody unlimited power. You don't do any checks on them. What happens is they abuse that power. It's too tempting for the government to, to have this kind of power and not use it on the people who criticize the government every once in a while, including the reporters, although they didn't criticize it much, if you ask me. So this is, of course, highly illegal. Now that raises the question of what are you going to do about it? And it puts Obama in an interesting position. He wants to look forward and not backward. He's not the confrontational kind of guy, but you have clear and brazen law breaking, and now we know it. And by the way, Russell Tice came forward on these revelations only after making sure that Bush was out of office. And this is another good reason why a change in administrations and a change in parties was a terrific thing, so we could find out what they were actually doing. Now, to be fair to the reporters and to Congress as to why they didn't discover this kind of law-breaking, well, Russell Tice also explains how they covered it up and how they didn't let Congress take a look at it. And this is ingenious and very interesting. Let's listen in on that as well.
Well, the agency would tailor some of their briefings to try to be deceptive for whether it be a congressional committee or someone who they really didn't want to know exactly what was going on. So there'd be a lot of bells and whistles in a briefing, and quite often the meat of the briefing was deceptive. One of the things that could be done was you could take something that was part of the Department of Defense, make it part of the intelligence community, and put a caveat to that, and make that whatever the intelligence community is doing for support will ultimately be given a different caveat. So when the defense committees on the Hill come calling, you say you can't look at that because that's an intelligence program. But when the intelligence program comes calling, you say you can't look at that because it's a Department of Defense program. So you basically have a little shell game that you're playing back and forth.
You got to give him credit. It is smart. But what did they say to us? Cheney said over and over, including in his exit interviews, oh, we shared everything with Congress. Well, Congress was totally in on it. Well, so if they're going to investigate us, they should investigate Congress. No, flat out lie. They did not share things with Congress. So that brings up the second question. Why? Why go through so much effort to cover this up? If you were really going after terrorists, if you were really going after Al-Qaeda, Congress would be totally on your side. In fact, they'd be scared out of their minds not to support you. They'd say, whatever you need. Why would you go through so much effort to make sure that Congress did not find out? You would do that if what you were doing was illegal and had nothing to do with terrorism at all. What the Obama administration will do with this is the next most important question. Are you going to let him get away with it? Are you going to say, yeah, you know what? When a president comes in, he can break the law any way he likes. He can spy on the media, in essence, destroying freedom of the press in a lot of ways. And we're going to let him get away with it. And if I do it, the next president will let me get away with it. And that's how the executive branch rolls from now on. It's unacceptable. It's not about political vengeance. If it was up to me, I wouldn't spend one more minute talking about the disaster of George W. Bush. He's done, in some ways, he's ancient history, and I'd love to move on because we got a lot of important things that we have to tackle. But as a matter of law and principle, you cannot let that stand. It's a terrible precedent. It will be used by others to continue to abuse the law. We cannot allow that kind of power grab to be accepted. Now we know, and we have a responsibility to do something about it. And it starts, by the way, at the NSA and General Michael Hayden, who used to run the NSA and then went over to the CIA, and who would always come to Congress and be like, oh, we're sharing everything with you. No, illegal. No. We're just listening to bin Laden and Zawahiri, and that's it. Oh, just a bunch of Al-Qaeda guys. By the way, all that listening to the Al-Qaeda guys, how come they didn't catch them? Because they weren't bothering to listen to them. Now, I'm not saying that they didn't go after Al-Qaeda at all. I'm sure there are a lot of great and diligent workers at the NSA, including Russell Tice, that spent a lot of time trying to get terrorists and Al-Qaeda guys. But obviously there was a lot of people there who did not spend any time on that, but spent time spying on us instead, innocent Americans and the media.